In a world filled with fear, confusion, and endless uncertainty, there is one truth that never changes. When you pray, when you trust, and when you release your worries, you step into a peace that no storm can steal, because God is still in control. Prayer is not merely a religious ritual or a repeated practice of words, but rather a direct connection between the human heart and the divine source of strength. In times of worry, the mind often becomes a battlefield of thoughts, doubts, and fears. These worries drain energy and cloud judgment. Prayer, however, serves as a spiritual discipline that shifts the focus away from problems and places it upon a higher power. When a person begins to pray sincerely, the burden of worry is lifted, not because circumstances immediately change, but because the heart and mind are realigned with faith and hope. Educationally, this can be understood as a shift in perspective, where human limitations are acknowledged and divine intervention is invited. The very act of prayer is a declaration that one is not alone, and that the situation does not rest solely on human ability. Another important aspect of prayer in the context of worry is the psychological benefit it brings. Studies in psychology and spirituality have often noted that prayer has a calming effect, lowering stress levels and encouraging resilience. When worry dominates, the nervous system often stays in a heightened state of anxiety, but prayer interrupts this cycle. It provides a pause, a moment where words are directed not to self or others, but upward. This pause has the power to silence fear and nurture patience. Educationally, one can view prayer as a tool of emotional regulation. It teaches discipline, consistency, and reliance on something greater than personal control. In this sense, prayer is not escapism, it is empowerment through surrender. Furthermore, prayer in times of worry helps to cultivate trust. Worry is rooted in fear of the unknown and the uncontrollable. People often worry because they project possible negative outcomes into the future, creating scenarios that may never occur. Prayer counters this tendency by anchoring the mind in faith rather than fear. For example, when one prays over financial struggles, instead of being consumed by uncertainty, the person chooses to believe that provision will be made. This does not remove the responsibility of wise action, but it keeps panic from dictating decisions. Prayer allows clarity to emerge where confusion once existed. Educationally, this is significant because it demonstrates how spiritual practices shape not only belief systems but also mental processes and decision-making abilities. Prayer also provides comfort because it assures that one is being heard. Worry thrives in isolation, in the thought that no one understands or that help is unavailable. When one prays, there is a reassurance that the concerns are not invisible. Even though answers may not come immediately, the very act of expressing these worries to a higher power brings relief. This aligns with the principle that expression is a necessary release. Just as sharing worries with a trusted friend lightens the load, prayer magnifies this by allowing the human spirit to release its deepest burdens into divine care. This release becomes an antidote to stress, teaching the heart to let go instead of holding tightly to what cannot be controlled. In addition, prayer is a practice of discipline that keeps a person steady during storms. Worry can make individuals unstable, moving them back and forth between hope and fear. A disciplined life of prayer establishes consistency. By making prayer a daily habit, one creates an anchor that is not shaken easily by circumstances. This steadiness becomes essential in times of crisis, for it teaches reliance on principle rather than reaction to emotion. Educationally, this can be likened to training the mind through repetition, much like studying a subject until it becomes second nature. The more prayer becomes natural, the less worry has room to dominate. Finally, the power of prayer in times of worry demonstrates the relationship between human weakness and divine strength. Worry reminds people of their limitations, but prayer reminds them that limitations are not final. Every prayer is an act of hope, an acknowledgement that what is impossible with human hands can be possible with divine guidance. In this sense, prayer does not deny reality, but it confronts it with faith. Educationally, this teaches the profound lesson that resilience is not found in ignoring difficulties, but in facing them with a higher perspective. Prayer strengthens the heart to endure, to hope, and to continue forward when worry would otherwise paralyze. Trust is one of the most powerful forces that can transform the human experience of fear and worry into a foundation of peace. Worry thrives where trust is absent because worry is fueled by uncertainty and the inability to see the future clearly. Trust, however, is a conscious decision to rest in the belief that outcomes, though unseen, are ultimately secure in the hands of divine providence. To understand this educationally, trust functions as an internal reorientation of thought. While worry projects the worst-case scenario into the future, trust anchors the mind in the assurance that unseen goodness is still possible. In this way, trust becomes the antidote to anxiety, teaching the heart to rely on faith instead of fear. Trust is not blind optimism. It is not a denial of challenges, nor is it a careless dismissal of real struggles. Rather, it is the active choice to believe that challenges do not hold the final word. For example, when someone faces illness, worry amplifies uncertainty. What if I never recover? What if my future is ruined? Trust, on the other hand, redirects these questions into affirmations. I do not know what tomorrow holds, but I choose to believe I am not abandoned. This shift is profound because it not only changes the mental framework but also shapes the emotional state. Where worry breeds tension, trust cultivates peace. Educationally, this can be examined as a form of cognitive reconditioning, where thoughts are retrained from panic-driven patterns into faith-driven ones. Trust is closely tied to the act of surrender. Worry is essentially the refusal to let go of control. It is the attempt to solve every outcome in one's mind before it happens. Trust dismantles this urge by teaching the principle of surrender, acknowledging that some things cannot be managed by human effort alone. In practical terms, this means making wise choices where possible, while releasing the anxiety of what lies beyond one's control. This educationally demonstrates the balance between responsibility and surrender. Responsibility requires action in the present, while surrender requires peace regarding the future. Trust allows both to coexist without conflict, ensuring that one can act wisely without being crushed by fear of outcomes. Another aspect of trust is the development of patience. Worry is impatient because it demands answers immediately, but trust waits without panic. This does not mean passivity, it means embracing the process of waiting without losing hope. Trust believes that timing has purpose, even when delays are painful. This is vital in educational understanding, as patience is a discipline cultivated over time. Just as a student learns to wait for the fruit of study to show in results, trust teaches the soul to wait for unseen outcomes with assurance. Trust, therefore, transforms worry into a calm endurance, anchoring the mind in faith even in long seasons of uncertainty. Trust also strengthens resilience. Worry weakens the body and mind, draining energy that could be used productively. When trust replaces worry, resilience emerges because energy is no longer wasted on fear. Instead, that strength is redirected into perseverance and constructive action. For instance, a person who trusts that provision will come does not waste days in endless fear, but continues working diligently, knowing that the unseen will align with effort. Educationally, this demonstrates how trust is not merely spiritual, but also practical. It equips the individual to endure hardships while still moving forward with confidence. Trust nurtures perspective, reminding the human heart that problems are temporary while faith anchors in the eternal. Worry magnifies difficulties, making them appear larger than life. Trust, however, places these difficulties into a broader view, understanding that no circumstance is permanent. This perspective shift is crucial in preventing despair. Educationally, it aligns with the principle of reframing in psychology, where perception is altered to reduce distress. Trust reframes challenges, not by ignoring their weight, but by reminding the heart that weight is not destiny. Finally, trust is deeply relational. Worry isolates, convincing the mind that it bears the burden alone. Trust, however, creates intimacy with the divine by acknowledging dependence. In this relationship, faith grows stronger with every decision to lean on divine guidance rather than personal strength. This relational trust produces security, knowing that even in uncertainty, one is never abandoned. Educationally, this illustrates the human need for connection and reliance, not only with people, but with the transcendent source of purpose. Trust in this context is not an abstract principle. It is an active, living reliance that transforms how one lives daily.